From Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio, AM 740.
Thanks for inviting me into your home. I'm getting a lot of email of people wanting to hear me weigh in on that absolute horror show that transpired in our nation's capital last Wednesday. And this is the challenge of a weekly radio show. I have to wait until my show rolls around once a week before I can jump on an important story. And we will delve into that later in the hour. A researcher and host of a popular podcast, The Conspiracy Cafe, will be here to talk about some of the, what shall we call them, oddities surrounding the official version of what happened up in Ottawa. Peculiarities, oddities, inconsistencies, perhaps, that he's seen, witnessed, delved into, and he'll share those with us. And while I don't necessarily subscribe to these, his version or his questioning of these events, I think these oddities or peculiarities in the official version of events deserve to be discussed and scrutinized in the light of day. And many of you may be thinking that it's too soon or it's too sensitive, and I am fully cognizant, believe me, that Corporal Nathan Cirillo has not even been laid to rest yet. And some of you might be thinking, how can you possibly think we're being lied to about what happened last Wednesday? A man is dead, for crying out loud. A wife has been widowed. A child has been orphaned. Now is not the time. But if there is some high-level criminal activity going on here, above and beyond what we're being told, then we must investigate. One of the techniques for suppressing the truth is for certain people to wax indignant. This is also known as the "how dare you" gambit. Other common techniques for suppressing the truth is to characterize the charges as rumors, or better yet, wild rumors. And if in spite of the news blackout the public is still able to learn about certain suspicious facts, it can only be through rumors. If they tend to believe the rumors, it must be because they're simply paranoid or hysterical. Then there is knock-down straw man. This is a common technique. You knock down a straw man. You deal only with the weakest aspects of the weakest charges. Even better, create your own straw man. Make up wild rumors or plant false stories and give them lead play when you appear to debunk all the charges, real and fanciful alike. Or you call the skeptics names like conspiracy theorist, nutcase, ranter, kook, crackpot, and of course, rumor monger. And be sure, too, to use heavily loaded verbs and adjectives when characterizing their charges and defending the more reasonable government and its defenders. You must then carefully avoid fair and open debate with any of the people you have thus maligned. And for insurance, set up your own skeptics to shoot down. And again, there are a number of things that disturb me about the official version of events that transpired, and I want to put those under the microscope a little bit later. Here's the thing. Whenever someone suggests, for example, the Ottawa shooting may have been some sort of a false flag, I don't discount it out of hand, and here's why. How could I even contemplate, you may be asking, that somebody, and I'm not talking about the Prime Minister here, I'm not talking about government officials, I'm not talking about cabinet members, I'm talking about unelected rogue elements that have power and influence. And I believe that there exists rogue elements in every facet of society, in every country, including Canada. And it's because I believe the real power in the world rests with psychopaths. Psychopaths rise to the top in our society. They have the power. You don't get to rise to the top unless you have certain attributes. You've got to be ruthless. You have to be remorseless. You have to be able to justify anything, perhaps even killing innocent human beings like Corporal Nathan Cirillo, if it furthers a certain agenda. We're going to talk about psychopaths a little bit here because my next guest, who has been with us before, wrote a book, a pretty profound book. It's kind of a survival guide. It's called The Art of Urban Survival, and one of the chapters is about just that. It's about defending against psychopaths, not psychopaths that are lurking in an alley. We're not talking about these random acts of violence. We're talking about the psychopaths that are in the workplace, are in the church, are at the public school system. They may even be at work, might even be your boss. Your boss might be a psychopath. How do we get out from under this? But further, we're going to talk about the history of cycles. Why is it we always seem to ignore the past and we keep repeating the same mistakes? We never seem to be able to get off this Hindu wheel of life. You know the old expression, right? Those who ignore the lessons of the past are condemned to repeat them. However, there are certain groups that are very mindful of these cycles. They take advantage of them. They plan for them. Now it's time for us to plan for these cycles. Stefan Verstappen is a writer, world traveler, artist, martial arts expert, street youth counselor. He's lived and traveled throughout China and East Asia, and while in Asia, he studied Oriental art, culture, and Kung Fu. Stefan is a master of the Lohan School of Martial Arts and one of the few Westerners to have lived and studied Kung Fu in China. He's a member of the Canadian Society in China and also worked as chairperson for the City of Vaughan International Economic Development Committee, in charge of facilitating the Twin Cities partnerships with cities in Japan and China, and he is the author of several books, including the aforementioned The Art of Urban Survival. His article, Historical Cycles, Are We Doomed to Repeat the Past? What to Expect and How to Prepare for the Next 10 Years, will be published in the fall edition of the Trends Journal, which of course is published by Gerald Celente, a noted futurist and trends analyst who has joined us on this program from time to time. Stefan Verstappen, welcome. How are you?
I'm fine, Richard. Thanks for having me back on the show.
So, cycles, and are we to measure then historical cycles in sort of 10-year in 10-year intervals? Is that how we look at cycles in 10 years?
Yeah, well, there's been many different theories on, historical cycles, and each theory has its own sort of timetable. And, for example, the oldest theory of historical cycles dates back to the Vedas, which is almost 6,000 years old. And they describe a four-stage cycle of history. And each stage in that cycle is 2,400 years long. Then coming a little bit more closer to the future, we have the Greek philosopher and historian Polybius, and he came up with also a four-stage cycle of history. And in his stage, the stages lasted 200 years, and all the way up through to modern times with the Strauss and Howe theory of historical cycles. And again, they use a four-stage pattern to describe these cycles. And they ascribe a time period of 20 years or 24 years to each stage in that cycle. So the time period, you know what? I toss it up. I think the time period is not etched in stone. I think it's a variable. I think it depends on the circumstances of the civilization in which you would apply this theory to. And so we see within our modern society, everything has speeded up incredibly fast. And even with human species, if we, go back only, 10,000 years, we went from, the Neolithic age of stone tools to, walking on the moon or not walking on the moon, depends on which theory you believe. But, nevertheless, we do have a flight. And, that in terms of history and geology and the cycles of history is extremely fast. So I think it's a mistake to assign that each cycle is going to last so many years and that each stage will last so many years. So I think it's variable, and I think what you should look for is the signs that are happening around us, the environment, what's going on with civilization, what's happening to our society, and by examining, the real-time events of what is occurring now, I think that is a better determiner, a better indicator of what stage in the cycle we are at, and also will help to show how quickly this cycle is moving.
Well, it suggests then, Stefan, that these cycles suggest that the world is not some orderless. We're not in. Things don't just unfold accidentally. There is an order to the universe with these cycles, and the question then is, what influences these cycles? Is it, for example, as perhaps the ancient Babylonians believed, that the sun and the stars and heavenly bodies influence these cycles? What is your theory? What causes or what influences these cycles, however long they may be?
Yeah, I'm going to jump to the end of the article and say that what I believe is that these cycles are natural. I do believe that. I believe that for every phenomenon that we see in nature, and just like your previous guest with his mind-reading abilities, but he bases it on basic science and observation. And I believe the same holds true for the cycles of history. It is based on a natural cycle. And the fact that almost every theory on historical cycles sort of shows a four-stage progression from, spring to summer to autumn to fall, and, a similar progression in the attributes of each stage from, a new beginning, a golden age, an age of reaping the rewards of your civilization, and then an age of decline and death. And of course, this is the four seasons. So if we look at, civilization as a living entity, and all of us, all the individuals, we are organisms with cells, individual cells that comprise this vast organism, then I think what we are seeing is, birth, maturity, old age, and death. And so the cycles do repeat, and they follow a natural pattern.
All right, we'll take a time out. When we come back, we'll find out from Stefan Verstappen what stage of life we are as a civilization. Are we in the infancy stage? Some might look around and say we are pretty infantile. Or are we simply stubborn adolescents? Well, there's an argument that can be made for that too. Or are we in the fourth quarter, the final 2-minute warning? Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us. Welcome back. Stefan Verstappen is with us. He is the author of a number of books, including The Art of Urban Survival, and he has an article that's going to appear in the fall edition of the Trends Journal, which is published by Gerald Celente. And the article is entitled, Historical Cycles. Are we doomed to repeat the past? What to expect and how to prepare for the next 10 years? And Kevin, I was asking you about what stage we're in. Let's assume, for example, that civilization is like an organism, like a human being, for example, that goes through infancy, the toddler stage, adolescence, on into adulthood, and finally old age. Where are we, in your estimation?
Well, I think a few people can deny that things aren't looking good right now. I look around me and I see the increased preparations by governments all over the world to suppress what is obviously going to be sort of civil unrest. And I wondered why they are doing that. I mean, why is there this sudden militarization of the police, not just in America but Canada as well, and looks like it's going to be increased now as a result of the Ottawa shootings, but also in Europe and the world over. And I thought, well, do they know something we don't know? What are they preparing for? Because the preparations they are making are obviously to suppress a civil disobedience or an uprising. Everything is focused on riot control and heavy police enforcement. So what are they expecting? What are they preparing for? I thought things were good.
Well, we're told that the economy is in recovery, sort of a halting recovery. Nonetheless, I've never believed that personally, but I think they're just papering over that. So there's one issue that continues to linger, and that is, chronic underemployment, I think, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's terrible out there. I don't believe the official statistics at all, because I know from firsthand experience, and people around me, everybody is frightened, everybody's desperate, everybody's worried about their job, worried about paying their bills. And so, I've seen this before. Now, where have I seen this before? Well, I've seen this in studying history. And when you see these conditions start to arise in any history book, covering any, from the Romans to the Chinese to the Japanese, when it gets to this part in the story, it's on the bad turn. It's at the end of its cycle. It's at the end of the good days. And what happens is we enter into what's called a period of chaos. And this is the collapse of the previous dynasty. And the previous dynasty, we could say, for example, in Russia, the previous dynasty was communism, and it collapsed. And even though, they have more freedoms now, but on the other hand, the conditions, the living conditions in Eastern Europe are horrendous, with the criminal elements controlling most of the cities and industries, and the poverty and the unemployment. Well, it wasn't that great, the collapse of that dynasty. Now, the next dynasty to collapse is the great consumer dynasty of the Western capitalists, the Walmart world and McDonald's world, and we've stuffed ourselves on junk food and junk, and but it's coming to the end of that, too.
Well, it's true. McDonald's stock is falling because, and Coca-Cola stock is falling because people have had enough of, sugary drinks and the perception that McDonald's is not healthy, and they're losing market share to their competitors. So you're right. Who would have thought McDonald's and Coca-Cola? I mean, that's blue chip stock, but it's falling.
Yeah. No, because that's what happens at the end of the cycle. So when you see these kind of conditions arise, and what conditions I'm talking about is increased militarism and government control, because at the end of every dynasty, what happens is civilizations collapse. Yes, it's natural, but a function of that natural collapse is the absolute and total corruption of the ruling elite. And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing an unbelievable greed and corruption going on in the governments of all Western countries and most Eastern countries as well. And what happens is, as they get greedier and greedier, they have to steal more and more. Now, because they're stealing so much, everyone else is poor. People can't afford to take vacations anymore. They can't afford to buy a new car. And in a year, or maybe 2 years, they're not going to be able to afford red meat once a week, or chicken, or fresh vegetables. So what's going to happen then when people can't afford to put food on the table for their kids and their families? Well, they're going to get upset, and they're going to blame the government because, the government greed and ineptitude and the taxes and the licensing and ad infinitum, all of the regulations, which is all in place just to take more money out of the economy to feed their greed. So, what you mentioned earlier, the psychopaths are in charge, and the psychopaths know only one thing, and that is to consume. And what they consume is the rest of us. So now what's going to happen? People are going to get upset, and they're going to go and protest. And those protests may turn violent. Hence, the government is already prepared. They've got the riot police, and they all have their new equipment and their anti-riot gear and the sonic weapons and the tear gas grenades. I mean, why else would they have all those things? Because they know what's coming.
And body bags and rumors of internment camps. But this is stuff that, only paranoids think about, Stefan. We've been, when people start talking about this sort of thing, they're considered, like one of those militiamen down in the United States who listen to shortwave radio and talk about how horrible the government is.
Sure, because, if we prepare and if we make ourselves stronger, we're less easily victimized. And, of course, since government now is in the business of victimizing the population, they don't want that. So they denigrate anybody who is, looking around and saying, wait a minute, this isn't what I was promised when I voted conservative, when I voted liberal, when I voted NDP. This isn't how it was supposed to turn out.
But what happens to those people that seek higher office? And I think in most cases they do it for all the right reasons. They genuinely want to help. So I don't think necessarily that the psychopaths are the people that come canvassing at your door asking you to vote them in as MPP or MP. Are we talking about some other level, which is what I believe happens, is you have this cabal, this unelected group that sort of forces the hand of these elected officials?
Yeah, absolutely, Richard. I have one of my students, former students, Kung Fu students, is running for councilman, and I know the guy. He's a decent, salt-of-the-earth fellow, family man. There's no way he's involved in any sort of nefarious conspiracy. I know that. And I believe that the same is true for probably most of the MPs and MPPs, that do come to your door. But, what happens is they are a part of a system that is controlled, and they're probably not aware of it either. And, in order to function, the big decisions aren't left up to them anyways. The big decisions are made somewhere else. And those decisions are made by whatever psychopathic cabal that runs things from behind the scene. And it's not being paranoid because, I've read a lot of history. And, if I were to tell you this story and it took place in China 1,500 years ago, nobody would say, oh, geez, you're paranoid. No, because you see the historical record. There is, ample evidence that these psychopaths had schemed to take over the empire and rob it blind, of course. But we think that it doesn't happen to us, and we think it doesn't happen now. But that's where history, again, proves us wrong. It happens, and it can happen to us, and it can happen now.
And you're saying that we are on the cusp or the precipice where it's going to happen again, which is we're talking about the collapse of an empire. In this case, we're talking about consumerism. But you mentioned these 10-year cycles, but surely this has been going on, this decline, has been going on for much longer than 10 years, and the predatory nature of, I guess, the unelected oligarchs. I mean, this has been going on for a lot longer than 10 years.
Yeah. I didn't say that I thought it was a 10-year cycle. That was a theory by Strauss and Howe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like I said, I think it's flexible. And also, I want to, because we're almost out of time, and I want to end on a positive note and say that I think this is a natural part that civilizations go through. And what happens is we go through sort of a period of chaos, but it's not the end of the world, and it's not the end of our civilization. It's the end of that paradigm. And we'll go through a period of turmoil, like all civilizations have gone through, and most of them, with few exceptions like the Maya and the Aztec, but most of these civilizations, like the French and the English and the Germans and the Japanese and the Chinese, they come out of this period and they build a better dynasty. The next one, if we can get through the next 5 to 10 years, and look out for each other, get some preps in the house, some extra food and supplies, learn how to do with less, and 10 years from now, we're going to see a better world.
I certainly hope you're right, Stefan. I mean, but it seems to me that now the stakes are much higher. We're not talking about, let's say, for example, the fall of the Roman Empire, where, as mighty as they were, let's face it, the weapons at their disposal were, basically slingshots by today's standard,
Right.
or the fall of the Visigoths, or the Mongol hordes, or name your empire. Now, when this house of cards comes a tumbling down, it's going to take a lot more people with it.
I'm not so sure.
No?
I'm trying to stay positive, Richard. I want to think, because we have one wild card that none of the other civilizations had, and that is mass communication. Your radio show, the internet, and and podcasts and television. We are able to disseminate ideas at instantaneous speed and reach more people than at any other time in history. And I think this could be a very decisive factor. I think, with your efforts and the efforts of your guests and myself, and to get people to become more aware of where we are at, and to make preparations to survive this and to work together. We gotta be careful, and we'll get through this. And I think ultimately the change has to come from our own thinking and our own mentality and our own spirituality. We have to, as a species, say enough of this, enough of the war and the chemical and the greed, and we have to say we're not going to support that, and we're not going to condone it with our silence. So, speak out, make preparations, be strong, and I think we might have a chance of reducing, the death toll of, the coming turmoil.
And just in the minute remains here before we move on to other things, and you're going to join us for our second half here as we discuss the horror show that was the Ottawa shootings earlier in the week. How do we prepare? How does an individual prepare for this rough ride ahead?
Well, it's anything you would do for emergency preparedness will get you through the same turmoil. The turmoil is just basically one big disaster. So extra food, extra medications, extra batteries, flashlights, candles, alternative sources for heating, and then the skills. Take a first aid course, learn some gardening skills, learn some bartering skills, and then get your people together. We have to form communities. We have to rely on each other. We are, the tactic of the psychopaths in charge is to divide us. We got the, men against women, race against race, religion against religion. No, this divides us. We need to seek each other out and support each other, regardless of race, religion, or sex. These are minor differences. We're all humans, and we have a common enemy, and that common enemy is greed and corruption, and we need to unite.
Well, your book, The Art of Urban Survival, what do you recommend? Do you stay put in the city where there is some infrastructure, at least for now, there is community, or do you hightail it for the rural areas and try to make it out there?
I don't think you have the option. A lot of people think, well, we'll go to the country, we'll live in the forest. No, that's not going to happen. Most people don't survive that, and I can, we don't have time, but I can give you a dozen examples from history where people have tried that. It doesn't work. Look, this is it here. We have to make our stand where we live, and most of us live in the city, and that's why I wrote the book. It's to give you the tools and the information that you can handle and deal and survive any kind of disaster that will happen to you while you live in the city. But this is our home now. There's nowhere to run to. We got to make it where we live.
The Art of Urban Survival, and his upcoming article in the fall edition of the Trends Journal, Historical Cycles. Are we doomed to repeat the past? What to expect and how to prepare for the next 10 years. Stefan Verstappen sticks around and will be joined by the host of the podcast, The Conspiracy Cafe, George Freund, as we discuss the Ottawa shooting oddities. Listener discretion advised. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett.
Question everything. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio, AM 740.